Hi, welcome to Joseph's Reserves. I'm Joseph, and I save 20% of my income in the form of coins and precious metals. Today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Seated Liberty series. The way I prefer to look at this series is through the coinage acts that actually changed silver throughout the 1800s. So we're actually going to start at the beginning of the series with the coinage act of 1837. But before we get there, there was actually one coin that was made before this coinage act. I have my red book here to help me as needed, and that's actually where we're going to start because this coin is the Gobridge dollar in 1836. So let's pull out this red book and we'll talk about it. This dollar was the debut of the Seated Liberty design. Designer Christopher Gobridge designed this Seated Liberty, which was the first depiction of the full body of Lady Liberty. As you can see, Lady Liberty is holding a staff with a Phrygian cap on the staff rather than on her head. Those of you that don't know, the Phrygian cap was a symbol of freedom all throughout history, all the way back to ancient Greece. At the time when a slave was freed, they were given this cap, and that cap was a symbol of their freedom. A lot of United States coinage shows this cap to symbolize our freedom from Great Britain. Another big note on this coin is that Gobridge added his name on the 1836 coin. So as you can see right above the date, in two different ways, he had his name engraved on the coin. There are a few different versions of the obverse and reverse. In one style, the reverse bears 23 stars, indicating the 23 states of the time. And on another, the obverse has the 13 stars of the 13 colonies. There's a lot more information here, but another key note is because this is before the Coinage Act of 1837. 1837 is when we transitioned to 90% silver and 90% gold. So this is actually the original composition and weight of the US dollar that was called out in the Coinage Act of 1792. Here you can see the Gobridge dollar. It was 0.8924 with the weight of 26.96. And the reason it shows that range is because the 26.73 is the weight after the 1837 Act. It doesn't show it, but the coins made after 1837 were 90% silver. Another interesting fact is that if you take a look at the reverse design, this is the design that was used later for the small cent. The first small cent was the Flying Eagle cent, and as you can see here, that design was used. This Gobridge dollar is technically considered a pattern since it was not made in enough mintage to be circulated. As you can see here, extremely low mintage, with the highest numbers being only just over 1,000. So after 1837, this design was starting to be used on smaller coinage, and it starts with the half dime and dime. And yes, I did say that correctly. There's half dimes. So the United States was the first country to use a decimalized system. And all that means is that we were the first one to have coins in the fractions of 10. So we had our dollar and the dime each having their own half. So we had the half dollar, half dime. We even had an eagle, which was the $10 gold coin, and then all the way down to the cent, of course, all of which had a half. There was a half eagle, half dollar, half dime, and half cent. Today we're going to be looking at the two middle categories, the dime and the dollar, and the respective halves and quarter that came along. Also in these series, there was a double dime or the 20 cent coin, and we will be taking a look at that as well. But let's talk about the half dime and dime. In 1837, they started with these series. And as you can see, these look a little bit different, and that's because this one is in 1849. So we'll go ahead and put this one down. They started this design, and it looked just like the dollar, at least on the obverse. That is, that it did not have a drapery under the arm holding up the staff, and there was no stars on the obverse. We'll go ahead and take a look at it here. Here in 1837 and 38, there were no stars on the obverse as well as no drapery. So here we get a close look at the drapery. Underneath the arm, there was extra clothing material added, and there was no stars. Later, they transitioned to adding stars on the obverse in 1838 and added drapery in 1840. The next thing to happen in 1838 was they started making the quarters. I only have 2 quarters here, and this is not the type that I was going to show, but you can see there are the stars. So when the quarter started, it did not start with a no stars version. They started with stars. However, they did have a no drapery version all the way until 1840. So there's no stars version for the quarters, halves, and dollars, other than the GoBridge dollar. Then the next year is when they started with the half dollars. The next year, in 1839, is when the half dollar started. And you can see in 1839, they also had a no drapery version. The half dollars were the first in 1839 to get drapery. So there are 1839 seated Liberty coins with draperies. And then in 1840 is when the seated Liberty dollars came out, and those all had drapery. So in the first few years, we have a couple different types, and it all has to do with the drapery or no drapery, stars, and no stars. So like I said, the half dimes and dimes went from no stars, no drapery, to stars, no drapery, and then stars with drapery. The quarter had stars, no drapery, and then stars with drapery. And the same for the half dollars. All right, so the next thing to change in these coins was the weight. The Coinage Act of 1853 gives us a secondary weight for all coins smaller than $1. So these coins here in 1853, right here I have a dime and a quarter from 1853, and you'll see there are these arrows by the date. In 1853, they lowered the weight so that these coins, when added up to $1, would equal 24.8 grams instead of the 26.9 grams. So these coins were significantly reduced in size, and the reasoning for that was that these coins were actually being melted because of their high silver content. The gold to silver ratio was such that people were hoarding these silver coins, specifically the smaller ones, because the full dollar-sized coins were more often sent to China markets and were spent there rather than staying in the United States. These coins were melted so often that they wanted to reduce the amount of silver to change that gold to silver ratio in the dollar. And when they did so, they added these arrows to indicate that there was a change. These arrows only lasted for a few years, and as you can see, even in this 1854, you can see an arrow right there, and the arrows stayed until 1855. Then, after 1855, they removed the arrows, and we returned to this original look of stars without arrows. However, before 1853, like this one, they weighed differently than the ones after 1853. So because of that, even though they have the same design, they weighed differently. In my mind, those are two different weights. However, a lot of typesets, like this folder here do not view those as different types and often have the same hole ranging through that time period, and then a secondary hole to indicate arrows. So for me, I wish to put a typeset together that includes all of these different weights. But that wasn't the last change in this series. After that, the dimes and half dimes went to something called the legends. See how now you have the United States of America around the outside, whereas before we had these stars. That change happened in 1860. So we go from 1856 with no stars all the way to 1860. Then we have that change with legends of this weight of 1853. In the larger coinage, we see that on the reverse, there's absolutely nothing here. In quarters and half dollars, in 1853, there were also rays around the eagle, and then 1854, no rays. The next change after that was a banner. This might be difficult to see here, but the banner above the eagle, and that says, "In God we trust." In God we trust. And that is called the motto. So the motto, "In God we trust," was added on in 1866, right after the Civil War. They say that around that time, because of the Civil War, people were leaning more into religion, more towards God, and they wanted to express that on the coins. There was, in fact, one more change to weight in the Coinage Act of 1873, in which they brought the weight back up to 25 grams per dollar. And that is actually where we stayed all the way until 1964. If you find any coinage of silver other than the $1 coins that add up to $1, it will take 25 grams of 90% silver if those coins are between 1873 and 1964. So those coins, I don't have any here, but those coins were also shown with arrows. So you'll see here it says arrows at date 1853 to 1855 and 1873 to 1874. And this is often the way that this series is shown, when they should have split this into two different types. This is the dimes we're talking about. So these arrows in the 1850s would be with the stars. And these arrows would be with the legends on the obverse. And you can see here they chose an 1873 example. So what they should have done is had a separate type in which it is arrows and stars and arrows with legends. The same is true with the quarters and half dollars. It'll show the two age ranges, the two date ranges for the arrows, and it's in which one should be arrows with no motto, while the other is arrows with motto. So again, another way that we could add more types to this series. And then after 1873, the mint actually chose to go away from certain denominated coins like the half dime. So 1873 is the last half dime that was made by the United States Mint. In addition to that, they also got rid of the 2-cent coin and the 3-cent silver coin in 1873. So after that was 1875, when they got rid of the arrows, and the series continued all the way until 1891. So after the Coinage Act of 1873, we actually had these trade dollars. You'd see this is 1874, a trade dollar. These were not meant for circulation in the United States. They were actually meant to circulate in the Asian markets, specifically in China. So most of these coins, if you find them, are marked with Chinese market markings called chop marks. And that's how, in that market, they would verify that these were good pieces of silver. As you can see, this is 420 grains of 90% silver. So this is actually larger than the other dollars, including the Morgan dollar. And that was so that they could compete with the other large silver coins within that Chinese market. These trade dollars are technically part of the Seated Liberty series because there's the full body of Lady Liberty, and she is indeed seated. We had these dollars all the way until the introduction of the Morgan dollar, and continued to make these in proof all the way until 1889. After that, the series ran all the way until 1891. Here are a few dimes, and of course these have the legends, but these are with legends at the weight of 1873. And of course they continued to run the quarters and half dollars, and these are still at the weight of 1873. So that is the full look of the Seated Liberty series. I'm not sure if you were counting, but there are quite a few types to collect. The last thing that the United States Mint did with this series was tested out the double dime, or the 20-cent coin. So you can see here, 20 cents. In 1875, they made this 20-cent coin, and it looked almost exactly like the quarter. So if you guys didn't know, this red book actually does the exact size coin. And here I have a quarter. So this is what a quarter next to a 20-cent coin looked like. Very, very, very similar in size. So in 1875, they had a circulated 20-cent coin all the way until 1876. And they continued to make proofs all the way until 1878, with extremely low mintages, of course. As you can see, these coins get expensive right off the bat to own, so I don't have one yet. These 20-cent coins were 1/5 of a dollar. And since the dollar was 25 grams, this was a 5-gram coin. 5 grams of 90% silver. I like to call these the double dimes because if we categorize our money into the denominations of 10, like I had said in the beginning, there was the eagle, the dollar, the dime, and the cent. We did, in fact, have a double eagle, a $20 coin. We did not have a double dollar, but we had this 20-cent double dime and a 2-cent double cent. So it's interesting to think of those as doublings of each category. So after the 20-cent coin, the series continued all the way until 1891. At that point, Charles Barber designed the Barber coins that we are very familiar with. In case you're not, I do have one here we can show. If my large cent would stay in the book. Here we go. This is a Barber dime, and this design took over the dime, quarter, and half dollar, and of course the Morgan dollar took over the dollar. So with all of this information, what is a collector to do? Well, I've written up my suggestion for a typeset, and this would be a all-out typeset, including the different weights and different designs. This is what it looks like. Let me go ahead and leave it just like this so you can take a screenshot if you're interested. Here we have 6 different half dimes all laid out, 8 different dimes, the double dime, $1/4, 8 different ones, 8 different $half, and even the 4 different dollars that we just went over. So clearly this is a 35 coin set. It'll take a long time to put this set together, especially if you're trying to put together one of great condition. So what I would suggest is to start with the denomination set. That would be the half dime, dime, double dime, quarter dime, $half, and dollar. Just that is a 6 coin set. Another possibility is to start over here. We could start in this category from 1873 onward, and that would be the 90% silver that we are used to, the junk silver. These are the coins that $1.40 adds to an ounce of silver. These coins, excluding the double dime, you may be able to get for close to junk value. And that is just the dime, quarter, and $half. If you are stacking, that is what I would choose for you. Another option is to start the typeset by era. We have 3 distinct eras, 3 distinct weights, and you could go with a denomination set of each weight and slowly work your way into this full typeset. Of course, the other option is what I chose to do, and just buy every single seeded coin you can when you see it. That may be a little less organized than what you guys are wanting to do, but that's kind of how I go about it. Anytime I see one and it's a type I don't have, I'll just make sure I end up getting that at the end of the day. So how I'm going to leave you guys is I'm going to lay out my coins on top of this list so you can see which ones I have and which holes I filled, because honestly, I just put this together and I'm kind of interested in which ones I need to get. So as you can see, I too have a long way to go in my journey. However, I do have almost a full weight set. I have a half dime and dime of Arrow 1, weight 1, a dime, quarter, and $half of weight 2, a dime, quarter, $half of weight 3. So all I need is the half dime from weight 2, and I'll have a whole weight set, a quarter and $half of weight 1, and with those 3 coins, I will complete the denomination set of each weight. Of course, the dollars come up and the 20-cent coin, but those are going to be large purchases later, probably to complete the collection. So this is what we're working with here today. Let me know what you think of my Seeded Liberty collection. If you have another strategy to tackle this collection, put it in the comments. Let me know what you guys think about this video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you think someone else you know might like it, make sure you go ahead and share it to them. But most of all, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day.